wrestling fans, get ready for this because today we're going deep on something that's got everybody talking.
Oh, yeah.
Should the Kliq get a second induction into the WWE Hall of Fame?
Whoa.
I mean, this is like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
but for,
Yeah.
for pile drivers and power bombs and all that,
Absolutely.
it's a really big deal.
Huge.
And we're talking about guys who are already legends in their own right.
Right.
Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Sean Waltman, Shawn Michaels,
Of course.
and Triple H.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question because in a way, the Kliq is already kind of woven into WWE history.
Right.
I mean, they've all been individually inducted, and some of them even multiple times as part of iconic groups like D-Generation X.
Of course.
And the NWO.
Yeah, and think about it, Sean Waltman.
Oh, yeah.
He was an active member of both of those groups during their peak.
Officially recognized by WWE as the only wrestler to do so.
It's crazy.
It's pretty amazing.
But here's the thing. Their story isn't all, championship belts and awesome catchphrases.
Right.
The Kliq was also infamous for its backstage
Oh, yeah.
power plays.
Yeah.
Allegedly manipulating matches and maybe even harming other wrestlers' careers.
Uh-huh.
So should they be rewarded with another Hall of Fame induction?
That's a good question.
Especially given that some of them now hold really powerful positions in WWE.
That's where the controversy lies.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about what they did in the ring, It's about their legacy and how we judge those who have achieved success, but maybe not always through, the most ethical means.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Okay.
One of the most notorious events linked to the Kliq is the curtain call incident.
Oh, yeah. Back in 96.
Back in 96 at Madison Square Garden.
Madison Square Garden.
Now, back then, kayfabe,
Right.
the idea that wrestling is real
Yeah.
was like fiercely protected.
Oh, absolutely.
But after a match, Nash, Hall, Michaels, and Triple H,
Yeah.
they broke character, Livey.
They did.
Hugging and celebrating in front of the audience.
In front of everybody.
Can you imagine?
It was a seismic shift.
Yeah.
It shattered that illusion of reality that wrestling had so carefully cultivated for decades.
Right.
And you can imagine how shocking that was for fans at the time.
Absolutely.
I mean, it forced the WWF to acknowledge the scripted nature of their product.
Right.
It changed the industry forever.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
And then there are the allegations about how they used their influence to hold other wrestlers back.
Right. And there's one very specific example with Carl Uel, who wrestled as Jean-Pierre Lafitte. And the story goes that he was supposed to beat Kevin Nash, which would have been a huge victory for him.
Yeah.
Could have really boosted his career. But allegedly, Shawn Michaels used his power to change the outcome.
Wow.
Uele ended up losing a string of matches and eventually left the WWF.
Wow. So they really...
In his autobiography, Michaels even admits it.
He does.
And I quote, "We buried him."
Wow. So buried, meaning they deliberately held him back.
Yep. Essentially sabotaged his career.
It makes you think.
It does.
What if you were working hard,
Yeah.
climbing the ladder,
Doing everything right.
and then you get pushed down by a group that's only looking out for themselves?
It raises questions about fairness.
Absolutely.
Power dynamics.
Yeah.
Not just in wrestling, but in any profession, really.
Yeah.
How much responsibility do those in positions of power have to nurture talent,
Right.
to create a level playing field?
Exactly.
Or is it just inevitable that those at the top sometimes use their influence to protect their own interests?
That's a great question.
It is a tough one.
So with all this baggage, why are we even talking about a second Hall of Fame induction for the Kliq?
Well, some people argue it's because certain Kliq members now hold key positions in WWE.
Makes sense.
Triple H, for instance, is the chief content officer.
Right?
So it leads to some speculation.
Yeah.
Is this induction less about merit and more about solidifying their current power?
Interesting.
Could it be a way to further legitimize their roles by etching their names in the Hall of Fame once again? Even if their past actions are controversial.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, did Triple H, knowing his position, did he know about this induction beforehand? I mean, the whole thing was presented as a surprise.
Right.
But could he have been in on it all along?
Well, the WWE Hall of Fame selection process is notoriously secretive.
Really?
We don't really know the criteria or who ultimately makes the decisions.
So that lack of transparency really raises questions about the Hall of Fame's objectivity.
It does.
Is it truly about recognizing the best?
Yeah.
Or are there other agendas at play?
It definitely fuels speculation.
It does.
Especially when you consider the Kliq's history.
Yeah.
It's hard not to wonder if personal relationships or political maneuvering play a role in the selection process.
Right. And you can't talk about the Kliq without talking about D-Generation X and the NWO.
Oh, yeah. Two of the most iconic groups in wrestling history.
Absolutely.
They revolutionized the industry. They did. And they were both inducted into the Hall of Fame, and rightfully so.
They were cultural phenomena.
They were.
I mean, they tapped into that rebellious spirit of the late 90s.
Absolutely.
D-Generation X was all about breaking the rules, challenging authority, and pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in wrestling.
This suck it.
Yeah, exactly.
Became part of the cultural lexicon.
They weren't afraid to be controversial.
Nope.
And that's what made them so appealing to fans who were looking for something different, something edgier than the traditional wrestling product.
Right. And then you had the NWO.
Oh, yeah.
Which completely flipped the script.
They did?
They presented themselves as invaders.
Yeah.
Outsiders who were going to take over the wrestling world.
Like a hostile takeover.
They had this cool factor.
Yeah.
This anti-establishment vibe that resonated with audiences who were tired of the same old storylines.
They were tired of the status quo.
Exactly.
And both groups were instrumental in ushering in the Attitude Era.
Oh, absolutely.
Which was a period in wrestling characterized by more mature themes, edgier content, and a willingness to break the mold.
Yeah.
It was a huge departure from the family-friendly entertainment that had dominated wrestling for years.
It changed everything.
And that shift had a lasting impact.
It did.
I mean, you could argue that the success of D-Generation X and the NWO paved the way for the kind of wrestling we see today.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Where characters are more complex.
Right.
Storylines are more nuanced.
Yeah.
And the lines between good and bad are often blurred.
Absolutely.
It's like they helped wrestling evolve and grow.
They did.
Pushing it to become something more than just, spandex and body slams.
More than just cartoon characters.
Yeah.
More depth.
Right.
More realism.
So much more.
But the question remains, can we separate their artistic contributions from their alleged misconduct?
It's tough.
Can we celebrate their impact on wrestling while acknowledging the potential harm they cause to individuals and maybe even the industry as a whole?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is a tough one.
And there are valid arguments on both sides.
There are.
I mean, some fans believe that their talent and influence outweigh their past actions.
Right.
Others argue that rewarding them with a second Hall of Fame induction sends the wrong message.
Yeah.
It essentially condones their behavior.
It's a complex issue.
It is.
No easy answers. And it's important to note that the WWE Hall of Fame isn't just about individual achievements.
Right.
It's also about recognizing those who have contributed to the overall legacy of professional wrestling.
Yeah.
So when we consider the Kliq, we have to weigh their individual actions against their collective impact on the industry.
It's like trying to untangle a knot.
It is.
You have these incredible accomplishments interwoven with these allegations of bullying and manipulation.
Right.
How do we separate the threads and decide which ones matter most?
And that's where the debate gets really interesting.
It does.
It forces us to confront our own values. What do we prioritize when evaluating someone's legacy?
Right.
Is it purely about success? Or do character and ethics play a role?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It is.
But maybe that's what makes this conversation so important.
I think so.
It challenges us to think critically about how we judge those who have achieved success.
Yeah.
Even if that success came at a cost.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that history is rarely black and white.
Right.
It's full of shades of gray.
Yeah.
And often the truth lies somewhere in between.
So if we're being honest, it's hard to ignore the impact of the Kliq.
Yeah.
They were pioneers, rule breakers, and they helped shape wrestling into what it is today.
But we also have to acknowledge the allegations against them.
Right.
The stories of how they may have abused their power and harmed others.
It's a complicated legacy, to be sure.
It is.
One that forces us to confront the good, the bad, and the in-between.
And ultimately, it's up to each individual fan to decide how they reconcile those conflicting aspects of the Kliq story.
Right.
And what it means for their place in wrestling history.
It's almost like a wrestling match itself.
Yeah.
It's a clash of perspectives, each with its own strengths and weaknesses.
I like that.
And in the end, it's the fans who decide who wins, who deserves to be remembered and how.
And that's what makes this whole debate so fascinating.
Yeah.
It goes beyond the world of wrestling and touches on broader societal issues.
It does.
We are increasingly being asked to reconcile the achievements of individuals with their personal failings.
Yeah.
To grapple with the complexities of legacy in a world where information is readily available and nothing stays hidden for long.
That's true.
It's a challenge to our own values, isn't it?
It is.
How do we weigh talent and influence against questionable actions?
Right.
Do we hold our heroes to a higher standard?
Oh.
Or do we accept that everyone is flawed and capable of making mistakes?
And speaking of seeing the whole picture, one thing that blows my mind is that the Kliq was instrumental in creating both D-Generation X and D, the NWO.
Talk about a double whammy.
I mean, come on.
They basically had their hands in both sides of the Monday Night Wars.
They did.
That epic rivalry between WWF and WCW, that totally defined the late 90s wrestling scene.
It's incredible.
It speaks to their understanding of the business, their ability to create storylines and characters that captured the imagination of fans on a huge scale.
Yeah.
They weren't just wrestlers.
No.
They were masterminds pushing the boundaries of storytelling and entertainment.
D-Generation X was all about rebellion, attitude, and pushing the envelope.
Absolutely.
They weren't afraid to be controversial.
Nope.
And their antics captivated audiences.
They did.
They reflected the rebellious energy of the time, and that's what made them so successful.
Right, and the NWO, they brought this whole invasion angle, this outsider perspective that was so fresh and exciting.
It was.
They disrupted the status quo and made people question everything they thought they knew about wrestling.
Both groups were instrumental in ushering in the Attitude Era, which completely changed the landscape of professional wrestling.
It was a game changer.
It became edgier, more mature, and more willing to break the rules.
Absolutely.
It's no exaggeration to say that the Kliq, through their involvement in these groups, helped shape the wrestling we see today.
Their impact is undeniable.
They
helped wrestling evolve, adapt, and remain relevant to a changing audience.
Right.
But the question remains,
what's that?
Does that impact outweigh the potential damage they cause through their alleged backstage politics and bullying?
A tough question, and it really comes down to personal values.
It does.
If you believe that talent and contributions to the industry should be the primary criteria for the Hall of Fame, then maybe you can overlook their controversial past.
Right.
But if you believe that character and integrity should also be considered a faith, then their actions might make you question their worthiness for a second induction. So where do we go from here?
Well, I think the first step is acknowledging the complexity of the situation.
Right.
It's not, black and white, good versus evil. It's about recognizing that people can be both talented and flawed, that success can sometimes come at a cost.
It's about having an open and honest conversation.
Absolutely.
Weighing the evidence and forming our own conclusions.
Right.
And that's what we've tried to do in this deep dive.
Yeah.
To explore the different facets of the Kliq's legacy, the good, the bad, and everything in between.
We've examined their rise to fame,
right,
their controversial actions, and their undeniable impact on the world of professional wrestling.
But ultimately, it's up to each individual fan to decide how they reconcile these conflicting elements and what it means for the Kliq's place in history.
Exactly.
If you were in charge of the WWE Hall of Fame, would you grant them a second induction?
It's a tough call.
It is.
One that requires careful consideration of all sides of the story.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating.
It really is.
We've unpacked the history, the controversy, and the impact of the Kliq.
We have.
But in the end, it's up to you to decide where they stand in the annals of wrestling history.
Thanks for joining us on this wild ride.